My name is Natalie, and I am 33 years old. I never thought a simple pregnancy announcement would end with my sister-in-law accusing my husband of sleeping with me just to ruin her birthday week. But then again, Jasmine had spent the last 4 years treating my husband like her own personal backup plan. When she finally crossed the line from subtle manipulation to screaming at me in a crowded five-star restaurant, I realized it was time to stop playing the polite wife and start playing the corporate auditor. I was about to dismantle her entirely. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to put an entitled in-law in their place. The sharp, ear-splitting shatter of crystal against mahogany silenced the entire dining room at Prime Cut Steakhouse. I barely had time to register the dark red Cabernet Sauvignon dripping down the front of my white silk blouse. The cold liquid seeped through the delicate fabric, staining the black and white ultrasound photo I had just proudly laid on the table. My hand still hovering over the damp sonogram of our 12-week-old baby trembled. Not from fear, but from a sudden white-hot surge of absolute adrenaline. "Are you out of your mind?" The shriek did not come from me. It came from my sister-in-law, Jasmine. She was standing on the opposite side of the large circular table, her chest heaving beneath her expensive designer dress, the empty stem of the broken wine glass still clenched in her perfectly manicured hand. As a 32-year-old African-American lifestyle influencer with over 500,000 followers, Jasmine was used to people looking at her. But right now, the stares from the affluent Chicago diners were not of admiration. They were of sheer horror. "You did this on purpose, Natalie," Jasmine screamed, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. She pointed a French-tipped finger directly at my face. "You waited until my birthday week to pull this desperate stunt. You just could not stand the fact that we were supposed to be celebrating my new brand deal tonight, could you?" I slowly picked up a cloth napkin and began dabbing at the wine on my chest. "I work as a senior corporate auditor for one of the largest financial firms in the Midwest. My entire career is built on analyzing chaotic situations, finding the discrepancies, and calmly dismantling liars. But looking at the woman who had just assaulted me over a baby announcement, I realized that family dynamics required a completely different kind of audit. Derek, my husband, shot up from his chair so fast it tipped backward and slammed into the hardwood floor. His face was pale, his jaw locked in absolute fury. "Jasmine, what the hell is wrong with you?" he barked, stepping between me and the table. "Natalie is pregnant. We just told you we are having a baby, and you throw a glass at her." Jasmine darted her eyes wildly, entirely bypassing her own husband Gavin, who was sitting next to her, blinking in stunned silence. Instead, she locked her gaze intensely on Derek. The mask of the polished, glamorous influencer slipped, revealing something deeply unhinged underneath. "How could you do this to me, Derek?" she cried out, her voice cracking in a bizarre theatrical display of betrayal. She slammed both of her hands on the table, leaning toward him. "You promised you would help me scout locations for my pop-up shop this month, but instead you were busy sleeping with her just to spawn this thing to ruin my moment." The silence that followed was suffocating. The waiter, who had been approaching with a tray of appetizers, froze in his tracks. My mother-in-law Brenda sat completely paralyzed in her chair, her mouth hanging open in shock. Derek looked at Jasmine as if she had grown a second head. "Sleeping with her? Jasmine, she is my wife. We have been married for 4 years. What kind of sick, twisted logic is that? She trapped you." Jasmine wailed, fresh tears spilling over her perfectly contoured cheeks. She reached out, trying to grab Derek by the forearm, completely ignoring the fact that her own husband was sitting right there. "You do not want a kid, Derek. You told me years ago you were not ready. She is manipulating you to take you away from the family." I dropped the stained napkin onto the table. The patience I had carefully maintained for the last 4 years of our marriage evaporated in an instant. I stepped around Derek, ignoring his protective arm, and stood inches from the edge of the table, making direct eye contact with Jasmine. "Let us get one thing straight," I said, my voice dangerously low, cutting through her hysterical sobbing like a scalpel. I did not trap anyone. We planned this family, and I am his wife. Jasmine sneered, wiping a tear away. You are just a boring accountant who could not keep his attention if you tried. An auditor, I corrected her coldly. And I pay very close attention to everything, especially you. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice so only the 5 people at our table could hear the absolute venom in my words. Are you throwing a tantrum because my husband is sleeping with me to build a family? Or are you having a total psychological meltdown because you are absolutely desperate to sleep with him and you know he will never look at you twice? The gasp that escaped my mother-in-law Brenda was so loud it sounded like she was choking on a chicken bone. For 4 years, Jasmine had carefully curated her image as the flawless, untouchable high society darling of the family. She was the one Brenda bragged about at her country club luncheons. She was the one who bought Brenda expensive handbags and dragged her to VIP spa days. I, on the other hand, was just the number cruncher. The woman who worked 50-hour weeks, paid her own mortgage, and never kissed Brenda's ring. My words stripped away Jasmine's glamorous facade in an instant, exposing the ugly open secret this family had spent years trying to sweep under the rug. Jasmine's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time all evening, she had no scripted comeback. Her eyes darted frantically toward Gavin, expecting him to step up and defend her honor. Gavin, who had spent his entire marriage acting as Jasmine's personal doormat and ATM, suddenly slammed his fist onto the table. At 36, he was a successful dentist, but around his wife he possessed the backbone of a jellyfish. Do not ever speak to my wife like that, Natalie. Gavin roared, his face flushing dark red. He stood up, puffing his chest out as he glared at Derek. Control your woman, Derek. Jasmine is under an immense amount of stress with her brand launch. She had a momentary lapse in judgment, and Natalie is out here throwing disgusting, baseless accusations. A lapse in judgment. Derek fired back, stepping directly into Gavin's personal space. My husband was a software developer, usually calm and analytical, but nobody threatened me and our unborn child without facing immediate consequences. Your wife just threw a glass of wine at my pregnant wife. If you cannot see how psychotic her behavior is, you are more delusional than she is. The restaurant manager, a tall man in a tailored dark suit, nervously approached our table. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but you are disturbing the other guests. I am going to have to ask you to lower your voices. Brenda turned crimson. Public image was everything to her, and the whispers from the surrounding tables were piercing her fragile ego. Enough! Brenda shrieked, finally standing up. She rushed around the table, wrapping a protective arm around Jasmine's shoulders, as if Jasmine were the victim of a violent crime. Brenda glared at me with absolute contempt. Natalie, you are a vulgar, jealous woman. Jasmine is practically a public figure. She provides for this family. She has a reputation to uphold. And you ruin her birthday dinner with this tacky announcement, and then you accuse her of something so vile in front of half of Chicago. Mom, are you serious right now? Derek asked, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. Look at Natalie's shirt. Look at the ultrasound picture. Jasmine assaulted her. It was an accident. Brenda snapped aggressively, smoothing down Jasmine's hair. Right on cue, Jasmine immediately buried her face in Brenda's shoulder, letting out loud theatrical sobs that sounded incredibly forced. Make them leave, Gavin. Jasmine wailed into Brenda's cashmere sweater. I cannot look at her. She is trying to destroy our family because she hates me. Brenda patted her back soothingly before turning her venom back to Derek. Jasmine just slipped, but Natalie's words were calculated and cruel. You always were jealous of her success, Natalie. You cannot stand that Gavin married a star while Derek married a corporate drone. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the need to argue with a woman who was willfully blind. I looked at the 3 of them, Jasmine hiding behind her fake tears, Brenda shielding her golden goose, Gavin clenching his fists in misplaced rage. In my line of work, when you identify a toxic asset, you do not try to negotiate with it, you cut your losses and liquidate immediately. An accident. I repeated, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. She threw the glass overhand. Brenda. That requires aim, not a slip. And as for being jealous, I assure you there is absolutely nothing about a grown woman throwing a temper tantrum in a steakhouse that makes me envious. Gavin took another step toward Derek, shoving my husband's shoulder hard. You heard my mother. Apologize to my wife right now, Derek. Tell your wife to take back what she said or we are stepping outside. You think you can just sit there and let her humiliate Jasmine and get away with it? I will beat some respect into you myself. Derek did not flinch. He swatted Gavin's hand away with a look of pure disgust. If you touch me again, I will have you arrested for assault right after I press charges against your wife for battery. Do not test me, Gavin. I am not the one blindly funding a fake lifestyle while my partner acts like a lunatic. Gavin froze. The sheer authority in Derek's voice drained the artificial courage right out of him. He slowly lowered his hands, taking a clumsy step backward. Jasmine stopped her fake crying for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening in genuine shock at Derek's absolute refusal to back down. Before Brenda could launch into another screaming fit about family loyalty, Derek placed a firm, protective hand on the small of my back. We are leaving, he announced to the table at large. Do not call us, do not text us, until Jasmine gets psychiatric help and you all figure out how to offer a genuine apology. Stay the hell away from my family. With that, he guided me away from the table. We walked through the maze of white tablecloths, completely ignoring the blatant stares and hushed whispers of the other patrons. I held my head high. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cower or rush out in shame. The valet brought our car around in stifling silence. The crisp autumn air of Chicago bit through my damp silk blouse, making me shiver involuntarily. Derek quickly took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders before opening the passenger door for me. As soon as he got into the driver's seat and closed the heavy door, the thick silence of the car enveloped us. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white, staring blankly through the windshield at the brick facade of the restaurant. I am so sorry, Derek whispered, his voice heavy with guilt. I should have seen this coming. I should have stopped her. You could not have stopped her, Derek, I replied, pulling his warm jacket tighter around myself. Because this is not a new problem. She has been crossing the line for years, and your family has just let her do it. Derek shifted the car into drive and pulled out into the busy downtown traffic, his jaw tight. What do you mean for years? He asked, keeping his eyes firmly on the road. Derek, please. I sighed, leaning my head against the cold leather of the headrest. Are we really going to pretend this just started tonight? Jasmine has been marking her territory since the day we got engaged. She is always overly competitive, Natalie. He reasoned, though he sounded deeply unsure of his own words. She loves the spotlight. But accusing her of wanting to sleep with me, where did that even come from? It comes from facts, Derek, I said, slipping back into the analytical tone I used in boardrooms. 2 years ago at Gavin's summer barbecue, who was the one who accidentally spilled beer on your shirt and insisted you take it off in front of everyone, offering to wash it right then and there? Derek frowned. She said she was just being helpful. She said she had a special stain remover. Right. And last Thanksgiving. I continued, ticking the points off on my fingers. When I was stuck in the kitchen helping your mother, who cornered you in the hallway for 30 minutes crying about how Gavin does not understand her creative soul, who asked if she could come stay at our house for a few weeks to clear her head. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I told her no. I told her our guest room was being painted. But she asked. I pressed. She always asks. She comments on every single one of your professional networking posts with heart emojis. She bought you a $200 bottle of cologne for Christmas last year, the exact same cologne you wore on our first date, which I had specifically mentioned to her in passing. She is not treating you like a brother-in-law, Derek. She treats you like an ex-boyfriend she is trying to win back. The car fell silent again as we merged onto the highway. The city lights blurred past us. I knew I was pushing him hard, but I could not let him retreat into the safety of denial anymore. We were about to be parents. The boundaries had to become impenetrable walls. Gavin makes twice as much money as I do, Derek finally muttered, shaking his head in pure disbelief. He buys her everything she points at. Why would she be obsessed with me? Because you tell her no. I answered simply. Narcissists like Jasmine cannot stand the word no. Gavin worships the ground she walks on, so she has absolutely no respect for him. She views his money as her birthright. But you established an independent life. You married someone she views as beneath her, a boring auditor. The fact that you prefer me over her glamorous, curated existence drives her absolutely insane. Tonight was just the mask slipping. Derek let out a heavy, exhausted breath. He reached over the center console and gently took my hand, lacing his fingers securely through mine. You are right. I have been making excuses for her because dealing with my mother's wrath is exhausting. But that stops tonight. I will not let them near you or the baby. We have to enforce that, Derek. I warned him as we pulled into our quiet suburban driveway. Your mother is going to try and spin this. She is going to blame my hormones. She is going to say we overreacted. If you give them an inch, Jasmine will take a mile. I promise you, Natalie, he said, squeezing my hand firmly. The doors are locked to them. No contact means no contact. I wanted to believe him, I really did. Derek was a good man, fiercely loyal, but he fundamentally underestimated the audacity of the women in his family. He thought logic and boundaries applied to them. I knew better. As we walked into our quiet house, I mentally prepared myself. The audit had officially begun. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, sealing out the chill of the Chicago night. I tossed my ruined blouse into the laundry room trash bin without a second glance. Derek hung his jacket on the hook, his shoulders slumped as if he were carrying physical weights. He walked over to the kitchen island and leaned heavily against the marble counter, burying his face in his hands. The silence of our home, usually a source of comfort, felt thick with unspoken tension. I poured myself a glass of cold water, my hands still buzzing with residual adrenaline. I know what you are thinking, I said, taking a slow sip. You are thinking about the phone calls. You are thinking about the voicemails your mother is going to leave tomorrow morning, demanding we apologize for ruining the family image. Derek looked up, his eyes bloodshot and exhausted. He ran a hand through his dark hair. I am not going to answer them, Natalie. I meant what I said at the restaurant. But you know exactly how she is. She will show up here. She will send Gavin to demand a sit down. They are not just going to let this go. That is exactly my point, Derek, I replied, setting my glass down on the counter with a firm thud. For 4 years I have smiled politely while your mother made passive-aggressive comments about my salary. I have bitten my tongue while Jasmine treated our home like her personal hotel and treated you like her backup plan. I did it because I loved you and I wanted to be the bigger person. But being the bigger person just gave them permission to treat me smaller. Derek crossed the kitchen and gently held my shoulders. I know, and I hate that I let it happen. I just thought if we ignored Jasmine's need for attention, she would eventually get bored. I thought keeping the peace was the best way to protect our marriage. Keeping the peace is a complete myth. I told him, looking straight into his eyes without wavering. There is no peace when only one side is constantly surrendering. Look what happened tonight. We announced the most joyful news of our lives, and she turned it into a circus of her own delusions. She physically assaulted me. If you had not dragged me out of there, your mother would have forced me to apologize to the woman who threw glass at my stomach. The reality of my words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He glanced down at my stomach, his jaw tightening into a hard line. You are right, he said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. I am done being the mediator. They crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I will call the security company tomorrow and have our alarm codes changed. I will block their numbers. I want this house locked down immediately. Locking the doors is a good start, but it is not enough. I warned him. You are treating them like rational adults who understand consequences. They are not. Brenda views your independence as a personal insult, And Jasmine views my very existence as a threat to her fragile ego. When they realize we are actually cutting them off, they will escalate. They always do. They will try to invade our lives in ways we cannot just lock out. So what do we do? He asked, a hint of desperation bleeding into his tone. I stepped out of his embrace and walked toward the large windows overlooking our dark front lawn. We stopped playing defense, I stated flatly. I am done being the quiet, compliant wife who absorbs their toxic behavior to save everyone from embarrassment. I am an auditor, Derek. My entire job is to find the rot hidden beneath glossy financial statements. Jasmine portrays this perfect, wealthy lifestyle, while she acts like a frantic, desperate woman behind closed doors. Gavin looks exhausted every time he pulls out his credit card. Brenda is blindly financing a charade. None of it adds up. And starting tomorrow, I am going to find out exactly why. But Gavin is my brother, Derek murmured, rubbing his temples. If you start digging into Jasmine, Gavin is going to get caught in the crossfire. He might be an idiot when it comes to her, but he is still family. He made his choice tonight. I shot back, refusing to yield an inch. When your brother stood up and threatened to physically fight you because you defended your pregnant wife, he forfeited his right to my protection. He is enabling a monster, Derek. And if he gets pulled under the bus that Jasmine is driving, that is his problem. I am not going down with them. Derek closed his eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath. He knew I was right. For years, he had played the role of the reliable, easygoing younger brother. He had absorbed Brenda's blatant favoritism and brushed off Gavin's arrogant bragging. He had done it out of love, but that love had been weaponized against him tonight. Okay, Derek finally said, opening his eyes. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a cold, protective resolve. You do what you need to do. If they show up here, I will handle it. If they try to harass you at work, I will hire a lawyer. I am with you, Natalie. 100%. I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction settle into my bones. The polite woman who allowed herself to be bullied was dead. I was going to war. I woke up early the next morning, the residual anger from the steakhouse still thrumming in my veins. Derek was still fast asleep, completely exhausted from the emotional toll of finally standing up to his family. I quietly slipped out of bed, planning to brew a strong pot of coffee and start digging into the public financial records of Gavin's dental practice. I walked down the carpeted stairs, my mind already forming a mental spreadsheet of where to begin my investigation. But as I approached the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. The rich smell of freshly brewed espresso filled the air. Our expensive espresso machine, which I meticulously cleaned every single weekend, was hissing softly. Standing directly in front of the marble island was Jasmine. She was not wearing the expensive designer dress from the night before. In fact, she was barely wearing anything at all. She was standing in my kitchen, casually sipping from my favorite ceramic mug, wearing nothing but an oversized white button-down dress shirt. It was not just any shirt. It was one of Derek's custom-tailored shirts, the ones he kept specifically in the back of his closet for important corporate meetings. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second before my professional auditor instincts kicked in. I did not scream. I did not panic. I simply stepped fully into the kitchen and crossed my arms. "How did you get in here?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Jasmine turned around completely unbothered. She leaned against the counter, crossing her long bare legs to ensure the shirt rode up just high enough to be entirely inappropriate. "Good morning to you too, Natalie," she purred, taking another slow sip of her coffee. "Your mother-in-law gave me the emergency spare key. She knew I needed a quiet place to film my morning vlog today. Gavin is having the contractors tear up our master bathroom, and the noise is just unbearable for my creative process." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer audacity of her excuse. Brenda had a spare key strictly for absolute emergencies, like feeding our cat or checking the pipes when we were out of town. She did not have permission to hand it out like a hotel room keycard. "And the shirt?" I asked, gesturing with a nod toward the crisp white cotton draped over her shoulders. Did Brenda give you that too? Jasmine let out a light breathy laugh and ran a manicured hand through her perfectly styled hair. Oh, this. I spilled a little coffee on my silk workout top when I got here. I went upstairs and I knew Derek would not mind if I borrowed something comfortable. We are practically the same size anyway, right? She gave me a wide, entirely fake smile that did not reach her eyes. You really should not be so tense, Natalie. It is not good for the baby. You broke into my house, I stated flatly, refusing to engage in her passive-aggressive bait. You bypassed our front door, went upstairs into my husband's private closet while he was sleeping, put on his clothes, and are now drinking my coffee. This is not a creative retreat, Jasmine. This is trespassing. Jasmine rolled her eyes, slamming the mug down on the marble counter hard enough to slosh hot coffee over the rim. You are so incredibly dramatic. Brenda said it was perfectly fine for me to be here. We are family. I do not know why you are trying to make this into some twisted scandal, just because you are feeling insecure about your changing body. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, closing the distance between us. I am not insecure, Jasmine. I am disgusted. You threw a glass of wine at a pregnant woman 12 hours ago, you publicly accused my husband of wanting to sleep with you, and now you are standing half naked in his shirt in my kitchen. You are entirely unhinged. Jasmine stood her ground, her jaw clenching tightly. I belong in this family just as much as you do. Gavin is a partner in everything they own, and Brenda loves me like a daughter. You cannot just shut me out because you are threatened by my presence. I am not threatened by you, I replied, keeping my tone ice cold. I am exhausted by your constant need for attention. Take the shirt off, leave the spare key on the counter, and get out of my house right now before I call the police and have you physically removed. She just crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Call them, she challenged, tilting her chin up defiantly. Tell them your mother-in-law let your sister-in-law in to make coffee. Let us see how that looks when the neighborhood watch group gets a hold of the story. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Do you honestly think I care about what the neighborhood watch thinks of me? I asked, stepping even closer until I could smell the overpowering, sickly sweet scent of her expensive perfume. I do not live my life for an audience, Jasmine. That is your disease, not mine. If the police arrive and find you half naked in my kitchen after letting yourself in without my permission, the only person whose reputation will be destroyed is you. I wonder how your precious online sponsors would react to a police report detailing your trespassing and harassment. The smug smile on her face faltered for a fraction of a second. She placed the ceramic mug back on the counter, her manicured nails tapping aggressively against the marble. Then her entire demeanor shifted. The theatrical loud influencer persona vanished entirely, replaced by something much darker and deeply venomous. She took a deliberate step toward me, closing the remaining distance until she was completely invading my personal space. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a harsh, quiet whisper so the sound would not carry upstairs. You think you have won just because you managed to get pregnant? She whispered, her eyes trailing down to my stomach with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. But you are going to get huge, Natalie. Your body is going to stretch and swell, and you are going to be exhausted and miserable. And when you are sitting around in sweatpants covered in baby spit up and crying over your lost youth, do you really think Derek is going to look at you with desire? Men like him do not want a tired, worn-out mother. They want someone who takes care of herself, someone who knows how to keep their attention and look good on their arm. She reached out lightly, tracing her finger along the collar of Derek's shirt that she was currently wearing. I know exactly what he likes. She continued, her voice practically purring with a twisted, delusional confidence. I see the way he looks at me at family dinners. I know he compares us. He is trapped with you out of a sense of boring traditional obligation, but we both know I am the woman he actually wants. Gavin is just a placeholder because he is easy to control. Derek is the real prize in this family, and you are just standing in my way. You always have been. He only married you because I was already taken by his brother. My stomach churned, not from insecurity, but from absolute revulsion. Her delusion was so deeply ingrained that she genuinely believed my husband, a man who had defended me fiercely just hours ago, was secretly pining for her. As an auditor, I look for facts, and the fact was that Jasmine was entirely disconnected from reality. "You are completely delusional," I told her, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through my veins. "He pities you, Jasmine. We both do. You are married to his brother, and you are standing here fantasizing about a man who finds your very presence exhausting. It is genuinely pathetic." Before she could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs behind us. Derek was awake. In a split second, Jasmine jumped back, her face instantly transforming into a mask of wide-eyed innocence. She pulled the edges of the oversized shirt closer together, acting as if I had been the one threatening her. "What is going on down here?" Derek asked, his voice thick with sleep, as he walked into the kitchen. He rubbed his eyes, and then he stopped completely. He stared at Jasmine, taking in the sight of his sister-in-law wearing his clothes, holding a mug of coffee in his kitchen. His jaw dropped in utter disbelief. "Jasmine, what the hell are you doing in my house?" "Good morning, Derek," Jasmine said, her voice completely changing pitch, sounding sweet and entirely harmless. "Brenda gave me the spare key so I could film some content. I spilled coffee on my top, so I just borrowed one of your old shirts. I hope you do not mind." Natalie was just telling me how inappropriate she thinks it is, but I told her we are family. Derek did not look sweet or understanding. His face darkened with the same furious intensity I had seen at the restaurant. "Take my shirt off right now," he demanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "There is a spare sweatshirt in the mudroom. Put it on, leave your keys on the counter, and get out of my house." Jasmine blinked, clearly shocked that her charm offensive was failing so spectacularly. "But Derek, Brenda said it was fine. I do not care what my mother said." Derek interrupted, pointing a firm finger toward the front door. "You are trespassing. If you ever enter this house without my explicit invitation again, I will have you arrested. Get out." Jasmine's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of red. The sweet facade crumbled instantly as she realized Derek was absolutely serious. She did not say another word. She stormed into the mudroom, aggressively yanked one of Derek's old gray sweatshirts over her head, and threw the crisp white dress shirt onto the floor like a piece of garbage. The spare brass key hit the marble counter with a sharp clatter. The front door slammed so hard behind her that the picture frames on the hallway wall rattled against the paint. Derek let out a long, exhausted sigh, rubbing both hands vigorously over his face. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and deep apology. Before he could speak, I raised a hand to stop him. We did not need to rehash what just happened. We needed to secure our home immediately. I turned away from the kitchen island and walked into the downstairs powder room to start my morning routine. I opened the mirrored medicine cabinet to grab my prescription prenatal vitamins. The second shelf was completely empty. I frowned, checking the lower shelves and the small vanity drawer. I always kept the amber bottle right next to my daily face wash. I never moved it. I walked back into the kitchen, thinking I might have left them by the sink the night before when I poured a glass of water. Nothing. A cold, heavy sense of suspicion settled deep in my chest. I walked over to the stainless steel trash can and pressed the foot pedal. Sitting right on top of yesterday's coffee grounds was the empty amber plastic bottle. The white childproof cap was unscrewed and tossed carelessly beside it. I pulled the bottle out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had just picked up the refill 2 days ago. It had been nearly full. I walked briskly back into the powder room and lifted the toilet lid. The water inside was slightly cloudy, and a single bright pink vitamin pill was caught on the porcelain edge of the bowl, slowly dissolving. She had dumped my entire month's supply of crucial prenatal medication and flushed them down the drain. I walked back into the kitchen and slammed the empty plastic bottle onto the marble island right next to Derek. He looked down at it, absolute confusion crossing his face before the dark realization set in. His jaw tightened dangerously, a vein pulsing at his temple. Before he could say a single word, his cell phone buzzed loudly on the counter, vibrating against the stone. The caller ID flashed his mother's name. Brenda. Derek reached for the phone, intending to decline the call, but I grabbed it first. I pressed the green accept button and immediately put it on speakerphone, setting it down between us. Derek, how dare you treat Jasmine like a common criminal? Brenda's voice screeched through the speaker, vibrating with sheer indignation. She called me in tears. She was just trying to film a simple lifestyle video, and you kicked her out like a stray dog. Have you entirely lost your mind? Your precious daughter-in-law just flushed my entire prescription of prenatal vitamins down the toilet. I answered, keeping my voice dangerously calm and utterly devoid of emotion. She broke into our house, wore your son's clothes, and then intentionally destroyed the medication specifically meant to keep my baby healthy. There was a brief telling pause on the line. Then Brenda let out a loud, condescending sigh that scraped against my nerves. Oh, please, Natalie, stop making up these ridiculous stories to cover your own mistakes. Jasmine would never do something so incredibly petty. You are pregnant. Everyone knows pregnancy brain makes women incredibly forgetful and clumsy. You probably dropped them in the toilet yourself and forgot about it, or maybe you just threw the bottle away by accident in a daze. I stared at the phone, completely stunned by the sheer audacity of her blatant lie. Are you actually trying to convince me that I miraculously unscrewed a child-proof cap, poured 30 large pills into the toilet, flushed them, and then tossed the empty bottle into the kitchen trash can, all without remembering a single second of it? Hormones do crazy things to a woman's mind. Brenda replied smoothly, entirely unbothered by the lack of logic in her twisted argument. You are stressed and clearly acting out. You attacked Jasmine last night, and now you are trying to frame her for your own clumsiness this morning because you feel guilty. You need to calm down, take a deep breath, and apologize to her before you ruin this family completely. Derek leaned over the counter, his face inches from the phone microphone. Listen to me very carefully, Mom, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. Jasmine is a vindictive, unstable woman. You handed her the key to my house. You actively enabled this. If I ever find out she is within 50 feet of my property again, I am calling the police and pressing charges. Do not call this number again. He tapped the screen, cutting the call off instantly. The silence in the kitchen was heavy and suffocating. Brenda was not just protecting Jasmine anymore. She was actively participating in a concentrated effort to make me question my own sanity. Gaslighting is a common tactic in toxic dynamics, designed to make the victim feel entirely crazy. But I was a corporate auditor. I dealt in hard facts, undeniable evidence, and solid paper trails. My reality was rock solid. Derek looked at me, his eyes filled with a new, dark resolve. I am calling the locksmith right now, he said, picking up his phone again. I nodded, tossing the empty vitamin bottle back into the trash can. Call them, I said. And while you do that, I have some financial statements to review. Within 45 minutes, a locksmith van pulled into our driveway. Derek stood on the front porch, watching like a hawk as the technician replaced the standard deadbolts with heavy-duty smart locks. Meanwhile, I walked upstairs to the guest bedroom to make sure Jasmine had not left any other surprises behind. I pushed the door open and immediately saw red. Sitting right in the middle of the freshly vacuumed carpet were 3 massive matching Louis Vuitton suitcases. She had not just stopped by for morning coffee. She had fully intended to move into our home for her little creative retreat. I grabbed the leather handles of the 2 largest suitcases and dragged them down the hallway. They were incredibly heavy, likely packed to the brim with her endless supply of makeup and outfits. I did not care. I hauled them down the stairs, the wheels bouncing loudly against the wooden steps. Derek looked up from the front door just as I dragged the luggage past him. I did not say a single word. I pulled them straight out the front door, marched down the paved walkway, and shoved them aggressively onto the damp front lawn. I went back inside, grabbed the 3rd suitcase and her oversized leather vanity case, and tossed them right on top of the pile. Derek paid the locksmith and locked the new heavy-duty door with a satisfying, solid click. He looked out the front window at the pile of expensive luggage sitting in the grass. I took a picture of the pile with my phone and sent it directly to Gavin with one sentence. "Come get your wife's garbage before the sprinklers turn on." I blocked his number immediately after hitting send. I walked back into the kitchen and opened my laptop. I was ready to pull the public tax records for Gavin's dental practice. But before I could even log into the secure database, my cell phone screen lit up. Then it lit up again. And again. Suddenly it was vibrating continuously, practically buzzing right off the marble island. I frowned and picked it up. My Instagram app, which I rarely used for anything other than following food blogs, was completely exploding with notifications. I opened the app and my stomach dropped, though not from fear. Jasmine had just posted a tearful video to her 500,000 followers. She was sitting in the driver's seat of her Range Rover, her makeup perfectly smudged to look like she had been crying for hours. She was wearing Derek's oversized gray sweatshirt, looking small and fragile. She looked directly into the camera, her voice quivering with expertly practiced emotion. "Hey guys," she sniffled, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "I am so sorry I will not be doing my normal morning routine video today. I am actually sitting in my car right now, because I just got kicked out of my brother-in-law's house. I came over because my house is under construction and my sister-in-law just went completely crazy. She is pregnant and her hormones are completely out of control. She screamed at me, body shamed me, and actually threw my luggage out onto the lawn. I am just so heartbroken that family can be this toxic and cruel. Please send some positive energy my way today. I really need it." She had intentionally tagged my private account in the caption. Within minutes, her rabid fans were flooding my phone. Hundreds of direct messages poured in calling me a jealous monster and a terrible mother who could not handle having a beautiful sister-in-law. They left disgusting comments on pictures of my dog. They threatened to find my workplace and get me fired. They were doing exactly what Jasmine wanted. They were doing her dirty work so she could keep her hands completely clean. Derek saw the notifications flashing rapidly across my screen and let out a string of angry curses. He reached for his phone, ready to call his brother again or defend me online. I grabbed his wrist to stop him. "Do not engage," I told him firmly. "Do not comment, do not post a defense, do not call anyone." This is exactly what she wants. She wants a public war to boost her engagement and paint us as the villains. I switched my phone off and tossed it into the nearest kitchen drawer. Let her followers scream into the void. Social media outrage is entirely fabricated, but financial fraud is a federal crime. I sat down on the high stool, cracked my knuckles, and opened my laptop browser. Jasmine had just invited 500,000 people to watch her play the victim. It was time for me to find out exactly how she was funding that performance. I closed out of the Instagram tab, entirely uninterested in watching the rest of Jasmine's fabricated performance. She was currently live responding to comments and soaking up the sympathy of her followers while sitting comfortably in the leather seats of the Range Rover my brother-in-law paid for. The internet loves a victim, and Jasmine played the part flawlessly. But sympathy does not pay the bills, and it certainly does not hold up in a court of law. I needed solid, undeniable leverage before I began digging into the complex financial records of Gavin's dental practice. While the public tax documents would eventually give me the paper trail I needed, I wanted something more immediate. I needed to understand exactly what was making Jasmine so desperate that she was willing to stage a break-in and risk alienating the one brother-in-law who had always maintained a polite distance. I opened a new browser window and logged into the secure dashboard of our home security system. When Derek and I bought this house 2 years ago, we installed top-of-the-line high-definition perimeter cameras. They covered the front porch, the driveway, the back patio, and the side gates. They recorded 24/7, storing the footage in an encrypted cloud server. If Jasmine had planned this little stunt to frame me as the aggressor, I wanted to see exactly how she had executed it. I pulled up the timeline for the front porch camera, rewinding the feed to 6:30 that morning. The screen flickered as the video buffered, and then the crisp, high-definition footage began to play. Sure enough, at 6:45, Jasmine's white Range Rover pulled into our driveway. She did not look like a woman seeking a quiet, creative retreat. She looked frantic. She practically threw the heavy car door open and rushed up the front walkway, dragging the 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases behind her. She was wearing her expensive designer workout clothes, holding a large iced coffee in one hand and aggressively typing on her phone with the other. I watched her stop on the front porch and retrieve the spare key from her designer gym bag. But before she could put the key into the lock, she froze. She stared down at her phone screen, her entire posture stiffening. Whoever she was texting it was clearly not a pleasant conversation. She quickly shoved the key into her pocket and brought the phone up to her ear, dialing a number. The audio picked up her voice, clearly cutting through the quiet morning air. "I told you I need more time," Jasmine hissed into the phone, her voice completely devoid of the sweet, breathy tone she used on her videos. "No, you listen to me. You cannot just freeze the account. I have the money, I just need a few more days to move it around without Gavin noticing the transfer." She began pacing frantically back and forth across my front porch, her designer sneakers squeaking against the concrete. "I do not care what the policy is," she continued, her voice rising in panic. "If you send a collection notice to the house, Gavin will open it. You know exactly what will happen if he sees those statements. He thinks the clinic is just having a slow quarter. If he finds out I maxed out the secondary credit lines, he will cut me off completely. Just give me until the end of the month. I am working on securing a new brand deal that will cover the minimum payments." She paused, listening to the person on the other end of the line. The high-definition camera caught the absolute terror flashing across her face. "Do not threaten me," she practically screamed into the phone. "You are not going to garnish the clinic's revenue. I will get you the $50,000 by Friday. Just do not call this number again." She violently ended the call, her chest heaving as she stared down at the blank screen of her phone. She stood on my porch for a full minute, taking deep, shuddering breaths, trying to compose herself. Then she smoothed down her hair, pulled the spare key out of her pocket, and unlocked my front door, slipping inside with her luggage. I paused the video feed, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs. $50,000. She was desperately scrambling to hide a $50,000 debt from her own husband, and she was doing it by illegally siphoning money from his dental clinic's secondary credit lines. And that was just the immediate minimum payment. I leaned back in the high stool, a cold smile slowly spreading across my face. Jasmine was not just a narcissistic influencer obsessed with my husband. She was a desperate fraudster drowning in debt, actively destroying her husband's business to maintain her fake online persona. The wine throwing the baby announcement meltdown, the staged break in it, was all a desperate smokescreen. She was terrified that Derek and I were going to expose the massive gaping holes in her perfect life. I exported the video file, saving it directly to my encrypted flash drive. I had my starting point. Now it was time to follow the money. The encrypted flash drive blinked with a steady green light as the video file finished transferring. I safely ejected it and placed it on the marble counter next to my coffee. $50,000 was a very specific number. In the world of corporate finance, a sudden, aggressive demand for exactly $50,000 usually indicated a defaulted merchant cash advance or a high-risk collateralized loan, not a standard credit card bill. Standard credit card companies do not threaten to garnish business revenue overnight over the phone. They go through a lengthy, formal legal process involving courts and official summons. The harsh voice on the other end of Jasmine's phone call belonged to a predatory lender. My corporate auditor instincts kicked into high gear. The anger that had been simmering inside me since the steakhouse was suddenly replaced by cold, calculated focus. This was no longer just a petty family squabble about boundaries and jealousy. This was a massive financial liability, and I was in my absolute element. I walked over to my leather briefcase, pulled out my secure work laptop, and set it up on the kitchen island. As a senior corporate auditor, I have access to highly restricted financial databases, but for this initial phase, I only needed public records. Every business loan that uses company assets as collateral requires a public filing. It is called a Uniform Commercial Code filing, or a UCC lien. I navigated to the official website of the Illinois Secretary of State and accessed the public business portal. I typed in the legal name of my brother-in-law's dental practice. The search icon spun for a brief moment before the results populated on my screen. My jaw tightened immediately. Gavin's clinic was practically bleeding red ink. There were 4 active UCC financing statements filed against his business in the last 6 months alone. None of them were from traditional, reputable banks. They were filed by obscure limited liability companies registered in Delaware, companies with generic names that I instantly recognized as aggressive, high-interest alternative lenders. These lenders had legally placed a blanket lien on all of the clinic's business assets. The expensive dental chairs, the advanced X-ray machines, the accounts receivable, and the business bank accounts. Everything Gavin had worked tirelessly for over the past 10 years was currently collateral for Jasmine's secret spiraling debts. It was not difficult to figure out how she had managed it. Gavin was the sole legal owner of the practice, but Jasmine had proudly appointed herself as the clinic's marketing director 2 years ago. That title gave her unfettered access to the company's employer identification number, the quarterly tax returns, and the primary banking details. She had weaponized her own husband's absolute trust to treat his medical practice like her personal piggy bank. Derek walked into the kitchen just as I was downloading the public lien documents. He had showered and changed into comfortable clothes, but the exhaustion was still evident on his face. He walked up behind me, wrapping an arm around my waist, and looked at the glowing screen. "What are you looking at?" he asked, his brow furrowing as he read the dense legal text. "I am auditing your brother's business," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. "And I am afraid Gavin is in massive trouble." Derek stepped back, his confusion quickly morphing into alarm. "What do you mean? Is the clinic failing? He makes incredible money, Natalie. He makes incredible money, but his wife spends it faster than he can drill cavities." I turned the laptop slightly so Derek could see the highlighted sections of the filings. I just watched the security footage from our front porch. Jasmine did not come here to film a vlog. She came here panicking because she was on the phone with an aggressive debt collector. She was begging them not to garnish the clinic's revenue over a $50,000 missed payment. Derek stared at the screen, his face turning pale. "Are you telling me she stole from him?" "She did not just steal from him, Derek," I said, my voice firm and serious. "She leveraged his entire livelihood. She took out predatory loans using his business assets as collateral to fund her fake influencer lifestyle. She is drowning in debt, and those lenders are about to freeze his business accounts." Derek reached for his cell phone on the counter. "I have to call him. I have to tell him right now." I grabbed his hand before he could unlock the screen. "No," I ordered. "If you call Gavin now, he will immediately ask Jasmine. She is a master manipulator. She will spin another web of lies, claim her identity was stolen, and cry until he believes her. Brenda will instantly take her side and accuse us of trying to ruin their marriage out of spite." "So what do we do?" Derek asked, running a frustrated hand through his hair. "We just let her destroy him." "No," I said, turning back to my keyboard. "We let her think she is safe while I gather airtight proof. I know the money came in. Now I just need to find out exactly where she is hiding what is left of it." I spent the next 3 hours completely immersed in the digital paper trail. Derek brought me fresh coffee and sandwiches, knowing better than to interrupt my workflow. In corporate auditing, we often rely on open-source intelligence before we ever issue a formal subpoena. People leave massive digital footprints, especially people who are desperate for attention and careless with details. Jasmine was both. I started by pulling the official corporate registration documents for Gavin's dental practice from the state business database. Gavin had incorporated the clinic 10 years ago as a single-member professional limited liability company, but 2 years ago, an amendment had been filed. The amendment officially listed Jasmine as the managing director of marketing and public relations. That single piece of paper was the key to her entire operation. It granted her legal authority to sign contracts, authorize vendor payments, and open secondary credit lines on behalf of the business. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I cross-referenced the four predatory lending companies that held the liens. I needed to see how the funds were dispersed. While private bank statements are shielded, business operating licenses and vendor registrations are entirely public if you know exactly where to look. I logged into a specialized skip tracing database that auditors use to track corporate assets. I ran a deep search on Jasmine's full name, her maiden name, and her registered business addresses. The search query took a few moments to aggregate the massive amount of data across all 50 states. When the results finally populated on my high-resolution monitor, a cold shiver ran down my spine. She had not just taken out a few desperate loans. She had built a highly sophisticated network to funnel the money out of the clinic without triggering Gavin's immediate suspicion. The database revealed 3 separate limited liability companies registered in the state of Nevada. Nevada is notoriously secretive about corporate ownership, but Jasmine had made a critical, arrogant mistake. She had used the exact same registered agent for all 3 shell companies, and the contact email address listed in the public directory was the exact same email she used for her influencer brand collaborations. I clicked into the operating details of the first shell company, aptly named Apex Media Consulting. According to the public business filings, Apex Media Consulting was a boutique digital marketing firm. I cross-referenced the name with Gavin's clinic. I found multiple press releases and public sponsorship records showing that Gavin's dental practice had officially partnered with Apex Media Consulting for a massive nationwide rebranding campaign. It was a classic phantom vendor scheme. Jasmine, acting as the clinic's marketing director, was approving massive vendor contracts and paying astronomical consulting fees to a company she secretly owned. She was literally invoicing her husband's business for services that were never rendered and then authorizing the payments herself. Gavin's accountant likely saw invoices for marketing services and approved them as standard operating expenses, completely unaware that the money was going straight into Jasmine's pocket. The predatory loans she took out in the clinic's name were simply used to cover the massive cash deficits she was creating, keeping the primary operating account just full enough to prevent bounced checks. Derek leaned over my shoulder, staring at the complex web of business registrations I had mapped out on the screen. He pointed at the name of the second shell company. "What is that one?" he asked, his voice rough with disbelief. I clicked on the company profile. "That one is registered as a property management group." I explained, my eyes scanning the listed assets. "Let us see exactly what properties they manage." I ran the company's identification number through the county tax assessor's database. The system pulled up a single luxury apartment lease located in the most expensive high-rise building in downtown Chicago. The lease was signed 6 months ago and the monthly rent was an astronomical $8,000. Derek exhaled sharply. "She is renting an $8,000 apartment with Gavin's money." "Why?" "Their house in the suburbs is massive. Because the suburbs do not fit her aesthetic," I said, clicking on the property's public listing. The apartment was marketed as an elite content creator studio featuring floor-to-ceiling windows, private elevator access, and a rooftop pool. "But she is not just using it to take selfies, Derek. You do not set up phantom vendors and offshore holding companies just to pay rent. There is more money missing here. Hundreds of thousands of dollars." I pulled up the third shell company. This one was different. It was not registered as a marketing firm or a property manager. It was registered as an import and export logistics company, and its primary banking jurisdiction was listed overseas. My stomach tightened. Jasmine was not just reckless. She was preparing for a total collapse. She was actively moving her husband's money offshore. And I was going to find every single penny before she could destroy this family forever. I clicked on the third shell company's banking details, my eyes scanning the heavily encrypted routing data. The routing numbers were not domestic. They bypassed standard American banking regulations, entirely pointing directly to a private financial institution located in the Cayman Islands. Derek stood completely frozen behind me, his hands gripping the back of my chair. "Offshore," He repeated, his voice thick with confusion and rising panic. Natalie, how does a local dental clinic in Chicago send massive amounts of money offshore without immediately flagging the Internal Revenue Service? Through phantom inventory and layered billing. I explained quickly, pulling up the clinic's publicly filed expense categories from a national medical supplier database. Gavin runs a high-end practice. He requires incredibly expensive materials on a daily basis. Ceramic crowns, custom titanium implants, specialized surgical tools, and state-of-the-art sterilization equipment. If the marketing director, who happens to be his legally appointed wife, switches their primary supplier to a new, highly recommended international logistics company, the clinic's accountant just sees a legitimate medical expense. I began cross-referencing the clinic's operating expenses with the third shell company's registered import records. There was a glaring, undeniable discrepancy right there in black and white. Over the past 18 months, Gavin's clinic had paid out over $400,000 to this overseas logistics firm for high-end dental equipment. But the public import logs for that specific shell company showed absolutely zero physical freight moving through United States Customs. Not a single box of dental floss had ever been shipped. She is invoicing him for thin air. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as the sheer scale of the fraud materialized on my high-resolution monitor. She submits a fake, highly detailed invoice for $50,000 worth of titanium implants. Gavin's accounting software automatically pays it out from the clinic's operating fund because she has the authorization to approve vendor payments. The money hits the logistics company's account, which she secretly controls, and then it is immediately wired to the Cayman Islands. It is textbook corporate embezzlement, Derek. She has been bleeding his business dry month by month right under his nose. Derek pulled out a heavy wooden bar stool and sank into it, looking physically ill. He rubbed his face aggressively with both hands. $400,000 stolen directly from the clinic, plus the secret luxury apartment downtown, plus the high-interest predatory loans she took out to cover the cash flow shortages she created. My brother is completely bankrupt, and he does not even know it yet. He is worse than bankrupt. I corrected him gently, turning my chair to face him. If the federal authorities audit the clinic and see these offshore transfers, they will not just assume Gavin is a naive victim. As the sole legal owner of the practice, he is technically the one committing federal tax fraud by writing off these phantom expenses to lower his tax burden. Jasmine is not just stealing his money to buy designer bags. She is setting him up to take the ultimate fall for federal tax evasion. If this blows up, Gavin could face actual prison time. The kitchen went deathly silent. The gravity of the situation was completely crushing. Jasmine's desperate obsession with presenting a wealthy, flawless influencer lifestyle to her followers had driven her to commit serious corporate crimes. And Brenda was blindly defending the very woman who was systematically destroying her favorite son's life, business, and liberty. I need to compile all of this into a certified audit report right now. I said, my fingers already flying across the keyboard to capture high-resolution screenshots and download the official routing documents. I am going to build a completely airtight dossier. Every fake invoice, every offshore wire transfer, every predatory loan agreement. I will map out the entire money trail so clearly that a jury could understand it in 5 minutes. Derek looked at me, a mixture of awe and absolute dread shining in his eyes. And then what do we do with it? We just hand it to Gavin and hope he believes us over the woman he sleeps next to every night. No, I replied, opening a new encrypted folder on my desktop and naming it with a keystroke. If we hand this to Gavin privately, Jasmine will manipulate him instantly. She will cry, she will threaten to harm herself, she will say she did it because she felt neglected and pressured to look perfect for his image. Gavin is weak when it comes to her tears. He will forgive her and try to absorb the massive debt to protect her from prison. We cannot give her the opportunity to spin the narrative behind closed doors. So who do we give it to? Derek asked, leaning forward. I looked up from the glowing screen, meeting my husband's exhausted but determined gaze. We do not give it to anyone yet. We hold on to it. Jasmine loves an audience, Derek. She thrives on public attention and grand stages, so we are going to let her have the spotlight. We are going to wait for the absolute perfect moment, and then we are going to drop this entire financial bomb right on her head. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously cataloging every piece of evidence linking her social media posts directly to the dates of her fraudulent wire transfers. The trap was fully constructed. We just had to wait for her to step into it. I had the corporate fraud perfectly mapped out. The offshore wire transfers and the phantom vendor invoices were more than enough to put Jasmine in federal prison, but a good auditor never stops at the first layer of fraud. Embezzlers always leave a trail of personal indulgence, and I needed to know exactly how she was spending the money that remained stateside. I turned my attention back to the second shell company, the fake property management group that held the lease on the $8,000 a month downtown luxury apartment. I pulled the secondary credit line statements attached to that specific limited liability company. The spreadsheet populated with hundreds of transactions over the last 6 months. I expected to see charges for camera equipment, ring lights, and expensive influencer wardrobe pieces. Instead, what I found made my blood run entirely cold. The first few charges were massive furniture orders from an ultra-luxury Italian design house. I pulled up the itemized invoices using the vendor portal. She had purchased a custom king-sized bed, masculine leather armchairs, and a solid walnut desk. None of the decor matched the bright feminine aesthetic she constantly projected on her social media channels. It looked like the bachelor pad of a wealthy, sophisticated man. But the furniture was only the beginning. I scrolled further down the spreadsheet and noticed a recurring pattern of high-end retail purchases: designer suits, expensive casual wear, custom leather shoes, and premium athletic gear. All of it was menswear. My immediate thought was that she was buying gifts for Gavin to keep him placated. But Gavin was a dentist who practically lived in medical scrubs. When he did dress up, he wore standard off-the-rack clothing. Furthermore, Gavin was built like a former football player, broad and stocky. I clicked on a massive charge from a boutique men's tailor in downtown Chicago. Because it was a business credit line, the digital receipt included detailed billing notes. I read the custom measurements listed on the invoice: a 34-inch waist, a 34-inch inseam, a 42 long jacket, a 16.5-inch collar, size 11 shoes. I stopped breathing. The kitchen felt completely devoid of oxygen. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my mind racing to process the terrifying reality of what I was looking at. Those were not Gavin's measurements. Those were Derek's exact, highly specific measurements. I clicked on another receipt from a luxury department store. 3 pairs of designer jeans size 34, 5 cashmere sweaters size large, 2 pairs of running shoes size 11. And then at the very bottom of the receipt was a charge for a $200 bottle of cologne. It was the exact same cologne she had gifted Derek for Christmas, the cologne he wore on our first date. Derek walked back into the kitchen carrying 2 fresh bottles of water. He saw the look of absolute horror on my face and immediately set the bottles down on the marble island. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with alarm. "Did you find something worse than the offshore accounts? Look at these receipts." I said, my voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. I pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Look at the sizes, Derek." He leaned over the counter, his eyes scanning the digital invoices. He read the numbers out loud, his brow furrowing in confusion. 34 waist, size 11 shoes. Why is she buying all this men's clothing on the clinic's credit card? Gavin is a size 38 waist. None of this will fit him. It is not for Gavin. I told him, turning my chair to face him directly. "Look at the measurements again, Derek. Look at the brand of the running shoes. Look at the cologne." I watched the exact moment the realization hit him. The color drained completely from his face. He took a stumbling step backward, his eyes wide with profound disgust and genuine fear. "She is buying clothes for me." He whispered the words, tasting like poison in his mouth. "She is not just buying clothes for you," I corrected him, feeling a sickening knot twist in my stomach. She rented a luxury downtown apartment with your brother's money. She furnished it like a high-end bachelor pad. She is filling the closets with custom clothing tailored to your exact body. She is creating a twisted, delusional fantasy life where you live there with her. She is simulating a marriage to you, Derek. Derek looked physically ill. He grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to steady himself. This is not just greed, Natalie. This is completely pathological. She is deeply sick. We cannot just wait for a public event to expose this. She is obsessed with me. What if she comes after you? What if she tries to hurt the baby? She will not get the chance. I promised him, my voice hardening into absolute steel. This changes the timeline. She crossed the line from financial fraud to a direct psychological threat against my family. I am finishing this dossier tonight. We are not going to wait for her to strike again. We are going to orchestrate the final confrontation, and we are going to do it on our terms. The next 4 months passed in a state of highly calculated silence. While my belly grew, so did the meticulously organized digital dossier sitting on my secure flash drive. Derek and I maintained a strict boundary with his family, ignoring their passive-aggressive texts and outright refusing to attend Sunday dinners. We let them believe we were simply holding a grudge over the steakhouse incident. In reality, I was waiting. Jasmine was a ticking time bomb of debt and delusion, and I needed her to gather as large an audience as possible before I detonated the truth. The perfect opportunity presented itself during my 7th month of pregnancy. Brenda had unexpectedly called Derek, weeping over the phone, begging for a chance to make amends. She promised to throw a small private baby shower for us at the Grand Plaza, one of the most exclusive 5-star hotels in downtown Chicago. She swore Jasmine would be on her best behavior and that it would just be close family and a few of Derek's childhood friends. She even claimed she had paid a massive deposit to secure the penthouse ballroom just for us. Derek was hesitant. He wanted to decline immediately and hang up the phone, but I gently placed my hand over the receiver and told him to accept. I knew exactly what was happening. Jasmine never missed a chance to use a high-end venue, and there was absolutely no way she was going to let me be the center of attention in a penthouse ballroom. The crisp Chicago wind whipped around my ankles as we pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the deep emerald maternity dress that elegantly draped over my 7-month bump. My secure flash drive was tucked safely inside my designer clutch, resting against my palm like a loaded weapon. It contained every fake invoice, every offshore routing number, and every receipt for the creepy menswear she had bought for my husband. Derek walked around the car and offered me his arm. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored dark suit, but the tension radiating from his jawline was palpable. He knew the plan. He knew today was the day we were going to end the charade forever. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Derek asked quietly as we walked through the revolving brass doors into the opulent lobby. The scent of fresh lilies and polished marble filled the air, a stark contrast to the heavy reality of what we were about to do. "We do not have to go upstairs, Natalie. We can just drive to the police station, hand the file over to the authorities, and let them handle the fallout." I looked up at him, giving his arm a firm, reassuring squeeze. "The authorities will handle the federal fraud, Derek, but I am going to handle her. She tried to destroy my marriage, steal your brother's livelihood, and simulate a deeply sick life with you. I am not going to let her quietly slip away into a plea deal without exposing exactly who she is to the people she cares about the most. Her audience." We stepped into the gold-plated elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. Brenda had specifically texted us that morning to arrive exactly a half-hour late. She claimed she wanted to make sure the intimate family surprise was fully set up before we walked in. That was my first concrete confirmation that the baby shower was a complete lie. Brenda hated tardiness more than anything. If she was actively asking us to be late, it was because she needed time to coordinate something entirely different. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and the illusion of a private family gathering shattered instantly. Instead of a quiet room with baby balloons, soft pastel decorations, and close relatives, The penthouse foyer was packed shoulder to shoulder with people, and they were definitely not Derek's childhood friends. The space was crawling with local Chicago influencers, minor internet celebrities, and professional photographers holding massive ring lights. Women in towering heels and sheer cocktail dresses posed against the velvet walls. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the dense crowd carrying trays of expensive champagne and custom craft cocktails. Derek stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes scanning the chaotic, glamorous room. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, pulling me slightly closer to his side. "This is not a baby shower." I looked past the surging crowd toward the entrance of the main ballroom. Instead of a welcome sign bearing our baby's name, there was a massive 10-foot-tall floral archway. Woven into the white roses and imported exotic orchids were massive gold letters spelling out Apex Beauty. Jasmine had not just crashed my baby shower. She had used Brenda to trick us into showing up so she could steal the five-star venue and the deposit for her own cosmetic brand launch. She had hijacked my milestone to fund her completely fraudulent empire. A cold, victorious smile crept onto my face. She thought she had outsmarted me. She had no idea she had just built the exact stage I needed to destroy her. Derek stood rigid beside me, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. We stepped fully out of the elevator and into the overwhelming chaos of the penthouse ballroom. The space, which was supposed to be a serene environment to celebrate the upcoming birth of our son, had been transformed into a garish monument to Jasmine's ego. There were towering ice sculptures carved into lipstick tubes, waitstaff passing around signature cocktails laced with edible gold, and massive tables stacked with expensive custom-branded gift bags. Every single detail screamed money. But as I looked around the lavish room, I did not see a successful entrepreneur. I saw the stolen funds from a dental clinic. I saw the predatory high-interest loans. I saw the fake offshore vendor payments manifesting as silk drapery and imported caviar. Where is my mother? Derek growled, his eyes scanning the sea of minor internet celebrities and professional photographers. We found her standing near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Brenda was draped in a silver-sequined cocktail dress, sipping champagne and laughing with a group of young women holding ring lights. Gavin was standing a few feet behind her, holding her designer coat and looking incredibly out of place in his standard gray suit. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes, a clear indicator of the massive financial stress he was carrying, totally unaware that the woman he was funding was the architect of his ruin. Derek marched straight over to them, pulling me gently along with him. Brenda saw us approaching, and for a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across her face. But she quickly composed herself, pasting on a bright, artificial smile. "Derek, Natalie, you made it!" Brenda practically shouted over the heavy bass of the club music pumping through the room. "I am so glad you are here." "What is this, Mom?" Derek demanded, his voice slicing through her fake cheerfulness. "You told us this was a private baby shower. You told us you booked this room for Natalie." Brenda waved her manicured hand dismissively, avoiding eye contact. "Oh, do not be so dramatic, Derek. Jasmine was in an absolute bind. Her original venue for the Apex Beauty launch fell through at the last minute because of a plumbing issue. She was absolutely devastated. I already had this penthouse secured with a $10,000 deposit, so I simply transferred the reservation to her name. We are family. We have to support each other in times of crisis." Derek looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You gave away our baby shower. You invited us here to stand in the corner while your daughter-in-law throws a party with the venue meant for our child." Gavin stepped forward, shifting uncomfortably. "Come on, Derek. Jasmine has been under a lot of pressure lately. This launch is huge for her brand. Mom said you guys would not mind postponing the shower. We can do a nice brunch at a local restaurant next weekend, my treat." I stared at Gavin, feeling a brief, fleeting pang of pity. He was offering to pay for a brunch with credit cards that were likely maxed out, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife had just spent another $100,000 of his business capital on ice sculptures and edible gold. Before Derek could tear into his brother, the heavy club music faded out, replaced by an upbeat, triumphant instrumental track. The room lights dimmed dramatically, and a massive spotlight hit the top of the grand staircase leading down into the ballroom. The crowd of influencers erupted into applause and cheers. Jasmine stepped into the spotlight. She was wearing a custom, heavily beaded couture gown that clung to every curve, her hair and makeup executed to absolute perfection. She paused at the top of the stairs, soaking in the flashing camera lights, pretending to wipe away a tear of gratitude. She slowly descended the staircase, waving to her fans, like royalty greeting her subjects. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, her eyes locked directly onto mine across the crowded room. The sweet, grateful expression on her face vanished for a split second, replaced by a look of pure, venomous triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she had completely erased me, humiliated me in front of hundreds of people, and proved once and for all that she was the absolute center of this family's universe. Derek took a step forward, his fists clenched tight. "I am going up there," he whispered fiercely. "I am shutting this down right now. I am dragging my mother and Gavin out of here and calling hotel security to cut the music." I reached out and grabbed his arm, my grip tight and unyielding. "No," I said, my voice eerily calm amidst the roaring crowd. He looked at me completely baffled. "Natalie, she stole your shower. She is humiliating you on purpose." I smiled, a cold, predatory curve of my lips. I looked past Jasmine, past the cheering influencers, and focused entirely on the massive digital LED screen set up behind the DJ booth. It was currently playing a continuous loop of Jasmine's glossy cosmetic advertisements. To the rest of the room, it was a marketing display. To me, it was a giant high-definition projector waiting for my encrypted flash drive. "Let her have her grand entrance, Derek," I told him, slipping my hand into my clutch and tracing the smooth plastic edge of the drive. "The higher she climbs on that stage, the harder the impact will be when she hits the ground. Our time is up. The audit is officially complete." Jasmine reached the bottom of the grand staircase, gracefully accepting a sleek silver microphone from one of her assistants. The heavy club music faded into a soft ambient track. The massive crowd of influencers and photographers pressed closer, their phone cameras raised high, capturing every calculated movement she made. "Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here tonight." Jasmine began, her voice echoing through the opulent penthouse. She sounded breathless, overflowing with a perfectly rehearsed combination of humility and excitement. "Welcome to the official launch of Apex Beauty. This brand is my absolute heart and soul. It represents luxury empowerment and the relentless pursuit of perfection." The crowd cheered loudly. Jasmine smiled, pacing slowly across the polished marble floor. But tonight almost did not happen. She continued, her tone shifting to one of manufactured vulnerability. "We faced so many unexpected obstacles this week. Honestly, there were moments when I thought I was going to have to cancel everything. But family always comes through in the end." She stopped pacing. She turned her body deliberately toward the corner where Derek and I were standing. The massive follow spotlight swung across the room, suddenly bathing us in a blinding white circle. Hundreds of heads turned to stare at us. I felt Derek stiffen beside me, but I kept my chin high, staring right back at her without blinking. "I want to take a special moment to thank my sister-in-law, Natalie," Jasmine announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Natalie is 7 months pregnant, as you can clearly see." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the crowded room. Jasmine let out a small condescending sigh, tilting her head in mock sympathy. She was actually supposed to have her little baby shower in this room tonight. But when she heard that Apex Beauty was facing a venue crisis, she graciously stepped aside. She gave up her space so that I could shine. And honestly, looking at her tonight, I think we can all agree she probably prefers standing in the background anyway. That dress is certainly doing its best to hide the exhaustion, honey, but pregnancy is just so incredibly hard on the body, is it not? The humiliation was entirely intentional. She was body-shaming me in front of half the internet. Several influencers pointed their phones directly at me, zooming in on my face, eager to capture my reaction for their live streams. Brenda, standing near the window, actually had the audacity to smile and raise her champagne glass in my direction, completely validating Jasmine's cruel narrative. Gavin stood frozen next to his mother, his face a mask of profound discomfort. He knew this was wrong. He knew humiliating a pregnant woman in front of hundreds of strangers was a horrific thing to do, but he simply stared at the floor, too much of a coward to interrupt his wife's moment of glory. The influencers, however, ate it up. They lived for this kind of manufactured drama. The entire room was feeding her narcissistic supply, validating the twisted reality she had built with stolen money. It takes a very specific type of woman to realize she simply cannot compete with this level of glamour. Jasmine continued gesturing wildly to the lavish decorations around her. So thank you, Natalie. Thank you for recognizing your limits and letting a real star take the stage tonight. I promise to send you some of our new premium concealer to help with those dark circles. The ballroom erupted into loud, mocking laughter. Derek lunged forward, his face flushed dark red with absolute rage, but I locked my arm tightly through his, anchoring him firmly to the spot. Let her finish. I whispered, my eyes fixed on the DJ booth situated just to the left of the main stage. The audio engineer was busy adjusting his mixing board, completely oblivious to the encrypted flash drive hidden inside my clutch. Now enough about the boring family drama. Jasmine chirped, pivoting effortlessly back into her high-pressure sales pitch. She gestured toward the massive LED screen behind her. I want to show you all exactly what we have been working on. We poured everything into this campaign. Blood, sweat, and a whole lot of capital. So direct your attention to the screen and let me formally introduce you to the new face of Apex Beauty. The ballroom lights plunged into total darkness. The crowd gasped in anticipation. The giant screen flickered, displaying the sleek gold logo of her fraudulent company. This was the moment. The DJ was distracted, cueing up the heavy bass audio track. The crowd was mesmerized by the glowing screen. I released Derek's arm and slipped through the dense crowd. My flat shoes made no sound against the marble floor. The darkness was my perfect cover. I navigated around a towering ice sculpture and slipped behind the heavy black velvet curtain separating the DJ booth from the main floor. The audio engineer was looking out at the crowd, his back turned to his laptop. I stepped up behind him, quietly unclasped my clutch, and pulled out the flash drive. With smooth, practiced precision, I reached over the console, plugged the drive directly into his primary USB port, and dragged my video file right over the top of Jasmine's promotional presentation. I hit the enter key to execute the file. The system briefly froze as my heavy dossier overrode the current display program. I pulled the drive out, slipped it back into my bag, and stepped back into the shadows just as the audio engineer turned around. Out on the floor, Jasmine stood proudly with her back to the screen, waiting for her commercial to play. I walked quickly back to Derek's side, grabbing his hand. "Watch the screen," I whispered. The audit was about to go public. Derek stared at me as if I had suddenly spoken a foreign language. His entire body was coiled tighter than a spring, vibrating with an overwhelming urge to step forward and physically shield me from the hundreds of staring eyes. He looked from my cold, unyielding smile to the dark screen behind the stage. "Natalie, what did you just do?" He hissed, his fingers gripping my arm with protective desperation. "We need to leave, right now. I am not going to let her stand up there and publicly humiliate the mother of my child while my own family claps for her. I am shutting this down." He took a forceful step toward the grand staircase, fully intending to march up to the stage, tear the silver microphone right out of Jasmine's manicured hand, and drag his mother and brother out of the penthouse. But I planted my feet firmly on the marble floor and yanked him back with surprising strength. "Stay exactly where you are," I commanded, keeping my voice low but laced with absolute authority. "Do not give her the satisfaction of seeing you lose your temper. I promised you I would handle this, and I am handling it. The trap is officially set, Derek. All you have to do is watch it snap shut." He blinked, completely bewildered by my total lack of distress. He looked toward the DJ booth where the audio engineer was now aggressively clicking his mouse, his face glowing pale in the monitor's light. The engineer tapped his headset, looking wildly around the room, completely unable to understand why his highly produced cosmetic commercial was refusing to execute. On the stage, Jasmine remained completely oblivious to the technical malfunction happening directly behind her back. She stood with one hip popped, her chin tilted upward, holding her pose for the sea of camera lenses. She was waiting for the heavy bass drop and the glowing gold logo of Apex Beauty to wash her in glamorous light. She held her bright artificial smile for 10 agonizing seconds, then 20. The silence in the penthouse ballroom stretched until it became heavy and uncomfortable. The influencers lowered their phones, exchanging confused glances. The professional photographers stopped snapping pictures. Over by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Brenda let out a loud, irritated sigh, clearly annoyed that her perfect daughter-in-law's big moment was being delayed by an incompetent hotel employee. Gavin simply stared at his shoes, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Derek looked at me, realization finally beginning to dawn in his eyes. "What is on that screen, Natalie?" He asked, his voice dropping to an awed whisper. "Everything," I replied simply. Suddenly, the giant LED screen flickered to life with a sharp electronic buzz. But it was not the sleek aesthetic beauty commercial Jasmine had paid thousands of dollars to produce. There was no upbeat club music. There was no gold logo. Instead, the massive screen illuminated the darkened ballroom with the stark, glaring white background of an official Internal Revenue Service tax document. It was blown up to 10 feet tall, impossible to miss. The top of the document clearly read, IRS, Form 1099 Miscellaneous Income. Because Jasmine was facing the audience, she did not immediately see what was projected behind her, but she immediately saw the reaction of the crowd. The collective gasp that echoed through the penthouse was deafening. Jaws literally dropped. The minor internet celebrities who just moments ago were cheering for her were now squinting at the screen, reading the massive black text illuminated above her head. Jasmine's fake smile finally faltered. She lowered the silver microphone, her perfectly contoured brow furrowing in deep confusion. She looked at the front row of influencers who were now pointing their phone cameras not at her, but directly at the giant screen behind her. "What is going on?" Jasmine demanded, her voice echoing awkwardly through the silent room without the background music to soften it. "Play the video." She turned around gracefully, expecting to see her own face modeling premium lip gloss. Instead, she came face to face with the undeniable high-definition proof of her own federal crimes. The document on the screen listed the payer as Gavin's professional dental practice. The recipient was listed as Apex Media Consulting, the phantom vendor shell company she secretly owned. And right in the center of the screen, highlighted with a massive red digital marker, was the total fraudulent compensation amount of $150,000 for a single financial quarter. Below the tax form, a secondary window popped open automatically. It was a high-resolution screenshot of the State Business Registry, clearly proving that Jasmine was the sole registered owner of Apex Media Consulting. I felt Derek exhale sharply beside me, his entire body going completely still as the gravity of the situation fully materialized. "You brought the audit," he whispered, gripping my hand so tightly my knuckles practically popped. "You brought the entire investigation." "I did not just bring it," I said, my eyes locked on Jasmine's rigid, trembling back as she stared up at her own financial death warrant. "I am presenting it to her board of directors." The audio engineer finally recovered from his shock. He lunged toward the mixing board, reaching frantically for the silver flash drive protruding from the USB port. "Do not touch that," I snapped, my voice slicing through the heavy murmurs of the ballroom. I confidently strode right into the center of the open DJ booth. The engineer froze, his hand hovering inches from the drive. "Madam, you cannot be back here," he stammered. I need to get the promotional video back online. The client paid for this visual package. The client paid for this entire event using stolen funds. I replied, keeping my eyes locked on him until he stepped back. I picked up the secondary microphone resting on the edge of the soundboard and flicked the switch to the on position. The sharp click echoed through the penthouse speakers, instantly commanding the attention of every person in the room. I looked out over the sea of influencers and photographers. Hundreds of phone cameras were now pointed directly at me. Jasmine had wanted a grand public spectacle. I was simply giving her one. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice projecting loud and clear. "I know you were expecting a glossy presentation about luxury cosmetics, but since the founder of Apex Beauty just publicly thanked me for giving up my baby shower space, I decided I should formally introduce myself. My name is Natalie. I am a senior corporate auditor and the sister-in-law of the woman currently standing on that stage." Jasmine gripped her silver microphone, her knuckles turning white. "Turn that off!" she shrieked, her perfectly curated influencer persona cracking violently down the middle. "Security! Get her out of here! She is trying to ruin my launch because she is jealous." I ignored her completely. I pressed the spacebar on the laptop, overriding her frantic screams. The giant LED screen behind Jasmine flickered again. The tax form vanished immediately, replaced by a massive, high-resolution flowchart I had designed myself. It was bold color-coded and incredibly easy to understand. "Success is a fascinating word, Jasmine." I continued pacing slowly behind the DJ booth. "Let us talk about how you define success. If you direct your attention to the screen, you will see the exact financial structure of Apex Beauty." The crowd gasped again as the flowchart illuminated the dark room. At the top was the logo for Gavin's dental practice. A thick red arrow pointed down to the shell company Apex Media Consulting. Another arrow pointed to the offshore Cayman Islands bank account. Over the past 18 months, Jasmine has been acting as the marketing director for her husband's medical practice. I explained, speaking with the measured cadence of a professional presenting to a corporate board. During that time, she created a network of phantom vendors. She submitted highly detailed, completely fraudulent invoices for dental equipment and marketing services that never existed. She then approved those payments herself, funneling over $400,000 out of her husband's business and directly into offshore accounts to fund this cosmetic brand. Gavin took a staggering step forward, bumping into a cocktail table. A crystal glass shattered against the marble floor, but nobody flinched. He stared up at the giant screen, his face completely devoid of color. He read the name of the shell company, recognizing the exact vendor he had been signing checks for over the past year. "Jasmine, this is a lie." Gavin choked out, his voice cracking with pure devastation. "Tell me this is a lie. Tell me you did not steal from the clinic." Jasmine panicked. She dropped her microphone, the heavy metal clattering against the stage floor. "Gavin, do not listen to her. She is faking those documents. She hacked into my computer. She is trying to destroy our marriage." I pressed the spacebar again. The screen shifted to display the 4 active Uniform Commercial Code lien filings. "I did not have to hack anything," I stated calmly. "These are public records. Because she siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your operating fund, she created massive cash flow deficits. To cover her tracks and keep the clinic afloat, she took out predatory high-interest merchant cash advances using your expensive dental equipment as collateral. Your business is completely bankrupt, Gavin, and you are legally on the hook for every penny of federal tax fraud she committed in your name." The influencers were practically vibrating with excitement. This was a catastrophic real-time corporate takedown. The live streams were capturing every second of Jasmine's total destruction. She had invited her entire world to witness her triumph, and instead, they were broadcasting her financial crimes to millions of people. I pressed the spacebar one more time. The visual presentation transitioned from the brightly colored corporate flowchart to raw, undeniable banking data. The giant screen filled with scanned copies of the actual wire transfer receipts. The destination address was clearly marked as a private offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. Next to each massive transfer amount, I had pasted screenshots from Jasmine's own public social media accounts, perfectly matching the dates. When the clinic wired $50,000 offshore in March, Jasmine posted a photo of herself holding a brand new luxury handbag, thanking her amazing husband for his support. When another $80,000 disappeared from the clinic operating fund in July, she posted a vlog from a first-class suite flying to Paris for a quote-unquote brand inspiration trip. I was not just telling a story. I was presenting a flawless, mathematically proven timeline of grand larceny. The sound of hundreds of smartphone camera shutters filled the air, a rapid clicking noise that sounded like a swarm of locusts descending on the room. The influencers were not looking away. They were zooming in on the account numbers and the dates. The live stream comment sections must have been moving at the speed of light. Jasmine had spent years cultivating an audience that worshipped drama, and now that very audience was eagerly consuming her real-time downfall. Jasmine realized she could not control the room anymore. She hiked up the skirt of her heavy beaded couture gown and practically lunged toward the DJ booth. "Turn it off!" She screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, completely devoid of the smooth, cultured tone she usually projected. "I will sue you, Natalie. I will drag you to court for defamation. This is a deepfake. Someone cut the power to that screen right now." I did not flinch as she charged toward the velvet curtain. I simply looked at the audio engineer, who had sensibly backed away from the console, entirely raising his hands in a gesture of total surrender. Nobody was going to help her. Gavin had not moved an inch. He stood in the exact same spot, completely paralyzed. The color had drained so thoroughly from his face that he looked physically ill. His eyes remained locked on the giant screen, reading the dates of the offshore wire transfers over and over again, as if hoping the numbers would magically rearrange themselves into something harmless. "Gavin, say something," Brenda shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking him violently. "Do not just stand there and let her ruin your wife. Tell everyone this is a mistake." But Gavin could not speak. He was a highly educated medical professional. He understood exactly what those tax forms and offshore routing numbers meant. He knew the Internal Revenue Service did not care about family drama or manipulative tears. He knew that as the sole legal owner of the dental practice, he was the one who would be indicted for tax evasion. His entire life, his reputation, his medical license, and his financial stability had been entirely eviscerated by the woman he had spent years blindly indulging. He slowly turned his head to look at Jasmine, who was currently wrestling with a tangled mess of thick black audio cables near the side of the stage, desperately trying to physically unplug the massive LED screen. The sheer pathetic nature of her panic was undeniable. There was no misunderstanding here. There was only guilt. "Is it true?" Gavin asked, his voice barely a hollow whisper, yet somehow it carried over the ambient noise of the crowd. Jasmine froze, her hands still gripping a thick power cord. She looked at her husband, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of cornered animal panic and rising fury. "Gavin, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I needed the money to build this brand. I was going to pay you back as soon as the launch was successful. I did it for us. I did it so we could be a power couple. You always said you wanted me to be happy. You forged my signature." Gavin said the words falling from his lips like heavy stones. "You took out loans against my clinic. You stole everything I built." Brenda let out a loud, dramatic gasp, finally realizing that the perfect image she had worshipped for years was completely fraudulent. She covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling backward until she bumped into the glass window. But the financial devastation was only the first part of the audit. I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice echoing through the silent, captivated room. "She did not do it for you, Gavin," I announced calmly, preparing to deliver the final fatal blow. I pressed the spacebar again to show them the luxury apartment. I pressed the spacebar again. The visual presentation shifted instantly. The damning banking data vanished, replaced by a series of high-resolution photographs of a sleek, ultra-modern luxury apartment located in the highest tier of a downtown Chicago high-rise. Next to the glossy photographs was a scanned certified copy of a commercial lease agreement. I used the digital marker to highlight the monthly rent of $8,000. This is the secondary headquarters for Apex Media Consulting, I announced, my voice echoing loudly through the silent, captivated room. Paid for entirely by the dental clinic's revolving credit line. Gavin stared at the glowing photographs on the giant screen. An apartment, he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and rising dread. Jasmine, why do you have a secret apartment? She did not rent it for business meetings, Gavin. I replied smoothly, not giving her a single second to formulate a lie. She rented it to play house. But she was not planning on playing house with you. I tapped the keyboard. The screen filled with dozens of itemized digital receipts from luxury Italian furniture designers and high-end men's boutiques. Look closely at the specific purchases made on the company card over the last 6 months, I instructed the crowd. A custom masculine leather armchair, a solid walnut desk, and an incredibly extensive, highly curated wardrobe. I read the highlighted numbers directly off the screen, my voice sharp and precise. 5 pairs of designer jeans, size 34 waist. Tailored suit jackets, size 42 long. Dress shirts with a 16.5-inch collar. Premium running shoes, size 11. Gavin looked down at his own heavy, broad frame. He was a size 38 waist and wore a size 12 shoe. He slowly looked up at his wife. The betrayal in his eyes shifted from pure financial shock to deeply personal devastation. He naturally assumed the worst. Who is it? Gavin demanded, his voice cracking loudly in the silent room. Whose clothes are these? Who have you been hiding in that apartment? Jasmine was shaking uncontrollably. She shook her head back and forth, her hands raised in a desperate, pleading motion. Nobody. Gavin, I swear to you, it is not what it looks like. I was just buying props for a lifestyle photo shoot. I was building a set. A photo shoot? I asked mockingly. Then why did you buy this? I hit the spacebar one last time. The screen zoomed in on a specific receipt from a luxury department store. It was for a $200 bottle of men's cologne. She is not having an affair, Gavin, I told him, my voice turning to absolute ice. Because the man she bought those clothes for finds her entirely repulsive. He always has. I pointed a finger directly at Jasmine, who was standing frozen on the stage like a cornered animal. She bought the exact same cologne my husband wore on our first date. She bought clothes perfectly tailored to Derek's exact measurements. She furnished that luxury apartment to look like the ultimate bachelor pad for my husband. The entire penthouse ballroom erupted. The influencers were practically screaming in shock. The scandal had just gone from a standard corporate embezzlement case to a deeply disturbing pathological psychological thriller. Hundreds of phones were recording every single second, broadcasting her absolute insanity to the entire internet. Derek stepped out from the shadows near the window, stepping fully into the light so everyone could see him. The disgust on his face was absolute. He looked at Jasmine as if she were a toxic, diseased creature. You are deeply, fundamentally sick in the head, Derek said, his voice laced with pure revulsion. I gripped the microphone tightly, ensuring my voice cut through the chaotic noise of the crowd. You threw a glass of wine at my pregnant stomach because you could not handle the reality that Derek was building a family with me. You broke into my house yesterday morning just to wear his dress shirt. You maliciously flushed my prenatal vitamins down the toilet and tried to convince everyone I was crazy, all while you were secretly financing a twisted pathological obsession with my husband using stolen funds. Brenda let out a horrifying guttural sob. She slumped against the glass window, covering her face. The golden child she had protected and elevated above her own flesh and blood was a predatory, delusional fraud who was actively trying to destroy both of her sons. You do not want a cosmetic empire, Jasmine, I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. You want my life. You want my husband, but you are nothing but a desperate thief playing dress-up with stolen money, and you are never ever going to have him. The silence following my declaration was absolute and heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a massive explosion. I watched Jasmine closely. For 4 years, I had only ever seen her wear the mask of the perfect, wealthy, untouchable influencer. But right now, under the glaring white light of her own financial ruin, that mask completely liquefied. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Her perfectly manicured hands curled into tight claws at her sides. The realization that there was no spin, no manipulation, and no tears that could undo the concrete evidence displayed behind her finally shattered her fragile psyche. It was a textbook narcissistic collapse. The total catastrophic destruction of the false reality she had built to protect her massive ego. When a narcissist realizes they can no longer control the narrative, they resort to pure, unadulterated rage. A guttural, high-pitched scream ripped from her throat. It was not the delicate theatrical crying she had used at the steakhouse. It was the feral shriek of a cornered predator. "I am going to kill you," she shrieked, the veins in her neck bulging against her heavy diamond choker. "You ruined my life. You set me up. You fabricated all of this because you know he actually wants me." She was completely unhinged, screaming her delusions into a room filled with hundreds of recording smartphones. The influencers who had worshipped her aesthetic an hour ago physically recoiled from her, but their camera lenses remained fixed on her every frantic move, broadcasting her breakdown to the millions of followers she had spent years deceiving. "Stop recording me!" Jasmine roared wildly, gesturing at the sea of glowing screens. "Turn those cameras off right now. Do you know who I am? I built this empire. You are all nothing without me." But nobody lowered their phones. The internet is a ruthless judge, and her audience was eagerly feasting on the spectacle. Realizing she could not command the room, her fury zeroed back in on me. She locked eyes with me across the polished marble floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred, her expensive makeup beginning to streak as angry, genuine tears finally spilled over her cheeks. "I will tear you apart!" she screamed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of dignity. She lunged forward. She did not care that there were hundreds of witnesses. She did not care about the federal tax fraud charges hanging over her head. In that singular moment, her only goal was to physically destroy the woman who had exposed her. She charged down the grand staircase toward the DJ booth, but Jasmine was not wearing athletic shoes. She was wearing a heavily beaded couture gown with a massive trailing train paired with 6-inch stiletto heels. The dress was designed for standing perfectly still on red carpets, not for sprinting in a blind rage. As her foot hit the second step, the sharp heel of her designer shoe pierced straight through the heavy silk and intricate beadwork of her own hemline. The momentum of her furious charge carried her forward, but her foot remained pinned to the step. The loud, sickening sound of tearing silk ripped through the air. Jasmine pitched forward violently. She threw her hands out to catch herself, but the heavy fabric tangled around her legs, completely trapping her. She tumbled down the last 3 steps, hitting the polished marble floor with a heavy, ungraceful thud. A collective gasp echoed through the penthouse, followed immediately by the rapid-fire clicking of hundreds of phone cameras, capturing the exact moment the queen of Apex Beauty ate the floor. The heavy ice sculptures seemed to mock her as she sprawled on the ground. Her expensive gown shredded thousands of tiny crystal beads, scattering across the marble like shattered glass. She tried to scramble back to her feet, but her heel was inextricably stuck in the torn fabric. She looked completely pathetic, a tangled mess of ruined silk and smeared makeup, crying and thrashing on the ground like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Gavin!" she wailed, reaching a trembling hand toward her husband, her voice reverting to a pathetic, desperate whine. "Gavin, help me up. Tell them to stop filming." But Gavin did not move toward her. He looked down at the woman he had loved, the woman he had nearly bankrupted himself to please, and took a slow, deliberate step backward. His face was completely devoid of sympathy. He looked at her not as his wife, but as a total stranger. A stranger who had stolen his life and harbored a sick obsession with his own brother. Derek stood perfectly still beside me. He watched her struggle with the cold detachment of a man watching a venomous snake tangle itself in its own trap. I looked down at her from the raised platform of the DJ booth. "You tripped over your own vanity, Jasmine," I said quietly, though the microphone carried the words perfectly across the room. "Just like you tripped over your own lies." The illusion was dead, and reality had finally arrived. Before Jasmine could even attempt to untangle herself from the ruined silk of her couture gown, a loud echoing boom reverberated through the penthouse. The massive brass-accented oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom did not just open, they were shoved violently apart. The heavy wood slammed against the velvet walls with a force that made several people near the back of the room physically jump. Hotel security guards usually wear tailored suits and move discreetly to avoid disturbing high-paying guests. But the men and women marching through the entrance were not hotel staff. They moved in a highly tactical, coordinated formation. There were 8 of them in total. 4 were local Chicago police officers in full uniform, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. But it was the 4 people leading the formation that made the remaining color drain completely from Gavin's face. They wore dark navy windbreakers. Emblazoned across the back in stark, authoritative yellow lettering were 3 letters that struck terror into the heart of anyone hiding dirty money. IRS, specifically the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I had mailed my anonymous, highly detailed dossier to their Chicago field office 3 weeks ago. I knew federal agencies moved slowly, but when you hand them a perfectly organized package containing offshore routing numbers, phantom vendor receipts, and signed commercial leases funded by stolen medical capital, they tend to expedite the process. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with graying hair and a totally unamused expression, walked straight down the center aisle. The sea of influencers parted for him instantly. Nobody wanted to accidentally obstruct a federal raid. The room was so quiet, you could hear the heavy thud of the agent's tactical boots against the polished marble floor. The agent reached the bottom of the grand staircase, looking down at Jasmine, who was currently on her hands and knees amidst a pile of shredded fabric and scattered crystal beads. Jasmine. He projected his voice effortlessly using her full legal name. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. Jasmine stopped struggling. She looked up at the towering federal agent, her mascara-stained eyes wide with an absolutely primal terror. She looked over her shoulder at the giant LED screen, which was still projecting her offshore banking transfers for the entire room to see, and then back to the silver badge clipped to the agent's belt. No. She gasped, scrambling backward like a crab, completely tangling herself further in the heavy dress. You cannot do this. I am hosting a private event. I am a public figure. You are making a huge mistake. Call my lawyer. The agent did not blink. He gestured to the 2 uniformed police officers behind him. Get her on her feet. The officers stepped forward, completely ignoring the fact that she was wearing a ruined designer dress. They grabbed her by the arms and hauled her upright. Jasmine screamed, thrashing wildly as the heavy silk tore even further. She dug her heels into the floor, but she was no match for the officers. They spun her around, forcing her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed sharply in the silent ballroom. It was the absolute final nail in the coffin of her glamorous influencer persona. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny, the lead agent stated, reciting her Miranda rights with a cold, practiced efficiency. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Gavin! Jasmine shrieked over her shoulder as the officers began to march her toward the exit. Gavin, do not let them take me. Pay them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding with the accountant. Please. Gavin stood perfectly still, his hands hanging limply at his sides. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman who had systematically stolen his livelihood and funded a secret life tailored to his own brother, and he did the only sensible thing he had done all night. He turned his back to her. Brenda, however, was not bound by logic or sanity. She let out a hysterical wail and lunged forward, trying to grab the arm of the lead federal agent. Stop it! Brenda screamed, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at me. You have the wrong person. She is the one you want. She fabricated all those documents on the screen. She is just a jealous, vindictive sister-in-law trying to ruin our family. Arrest her. The agent stopped and looked at Brenda with an expression of pure, exhausted disbelief. "Madam, if you touch me again, I will arrest you for assaulting a federal officer and obstructing justice. Step back immediately." Brenda froze, her hand hovering in the air. The threat of her own arrest finally penetrated her delusional bubble. She slowly lowered her arms, stepping back into the shadows of the window, weeping uncontrollably as the officers dragged Jasmine away. It was the ultimate perpetrator walk. Instead of descending the grand staircase like a queen to the sound of club music, Jasmine was frog-marched out of her own hijacked party in a shredded, ruined gown. Every single influencer in the room had their phone raised, recording her sobbing, screaming exit from dozens of different angles. She had wanted to broadcast her success to millions. Instead, she had just live-streamed her federal arrest. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind the federal agents, sealing the penthouse ballroom. The stunned silence that had temporarily gripped the crowd shattered, instantly replaced by a deafening roar of frantic whispers and dialing phones. The influencers were scrambling to upload their footage, desperate to be the first to break the massive scandal of the year. Hotel security finally snapped out of their collective shock and began ushering the uninvited guests and camera crews out of the luxurious venue. I stood on the raised platform of the DJ booth, calmly watching the room clear out. Derek walked up the short steps and stood firmly beside me. He did not say a word, but the steady warmth of his hand resting on my lower back communicated everything I needed to know. We had successfully survived the blast radius. Down on the main floor, Gavin was not so lucky. He was standing exactly where he had been when Jasmine was arrested, surrounded by the discarded promotional gift bags and rapidly melting ice sculptures. His broad shoulders hunched forward as if an invisible crushing weight was physically pressing him into the floor. Then his knees simply gave out. He collapsed onto the polished marble landing, hard amidst the scattered crystal beads from his wife's ruined designer gown. Derek immediately started down the steps to help his brother, but I held him back by the arm for just a moment. "Let him process it," I said quietly. "If you try to fix it for him now, he will never understand the absolute reality of what just happened." Gavin buried his face in his hands. A raw, agonizing sob tore from his chest. It was the sound of a man who had just watched his entire life evaporate. "My clinic is gone," he repeated over and over, his voice completely muffled by his hands. "My dental practice, my medical license. I am going to federal prison because I trusted her. Everything I worked for is completely gone." Derek pulled away from my grip and walked over to Gavin. He crouched down, placing a firm, supportive hand on his older brother's shaking shoulder. "You are not going to prison, Gavin," Derek said, his voice steady and grounding. "Natalie mapped out the entire fraud. The paper trail clearly shows Jasmine forged your signatures and bypassed your administrative authorization. You need to hire the absolute best white-collar criminal defense attorney in Chicago tomorrow morning and hand them the dossier. You can rebuild this." Gavin looked up, his eyes violently bloodshot and hollow. "Rebuild with what, Derek? The business operating accounts are totally drained. The high-interest alternative lenders are going to seize my expensive dental chairs and x-ray machines by Friday. I am completely bankrupt. I have absolutely nothing left." Before Derek could offer another word of comfort, the sharp, frantic clicking of heels echoed across the empty room. Brenda emerged from the dark shadows near the window. Her silver sequined dress sparkled under the dim chandeliers, a stark contrast to her heavily tear-stained face and disheveled hair. The immediate fear of being arrested had temporarily silenced her, but now that the federal agents were gone, her profound delusion returned with full force. She rushed over to us, completely ignoring Gavin sobbing on the floor. She grabbed Derek tightly by the lapels of his suit jacket, her eyes wild with a frantic, desperate energy. "You have to fix this, Derek," Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and incredibly commanding. "You have to call your bank right now. Jasmine is sitting in a federal holding cell downtown. They are going to set her bail by morning, and it is going to be a massive amount. You and Natalie make excellent corporate money. You have savings. You need to wire the funds to post her bond immediately. Derek stared at his mother, his jaw dropping in absolute disbelief. He slowly reached up and peeled her manicured hands off his jacket, pushing her a firm step backward. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he asked, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, barely contained anger. "She is family!" Brenda screamed, pointing a violently shaking finger at him. "You do not abandon family to rot in a dirty jail cell. She made a mistake. She got in over her head with the business marketing, but she is a good girl. You have the money, Derek. If you do not bail her out, the media will tear her to pieces. Her cosmetic brand will be ruined permanently. Her brand was built on stolen money, Mom." Derek roared, his voice echoing off the high penthouse ceilings. "She stole $500,000 from Gavin. She took out predatory loans that completely ruined his life. She broke into my house, assaulted my pregnant wife, and used the stolen money to rent an apartment so she could play out a sick fantasy with my clothes. And you want me to empty my savings account to bail her out?" Brenda completely ignored the concrete facts, clinging desperately to her warped reality. "She is your sister-in-law," she shrieked loudly. "You owe her your loyalty." Natalie orchestrated this entire public humiliation because she is a vindictive, hateful woman. If you do not pay that bail right now, you are no son of mine. Derek stood incredibly tall, looking down at the woman who had spent his entire life prioritizing fake appearances over reality. He did not yell this time. He spoke with a cold, absolute finality that chilled the room. "Then I guess I am an orphan," Derek stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Because I would rather burn my money in the street than spend a single dime on that monster." Brenda stared at her youngest son, her mouth opening and closing silently. The threat of total abandonment from the son she had always treated as a boring afterthought suddenly terrified her, especially now that her golden child was sitting in the back of a federal squad car and her favorite son was weeping uncontrollably on the floor. She took a trembling step toward Derek, reaching out to grab his arm again, but he stepped back smoothly, remaining entirely out of her reach. "You do not mean that, Derek." Brenda pleaded, her voice cracking under the immense weight of the reality she was finally being forced to face. "I am your mother. You cannot just walk away from your family when things get difficult. We are supposed to stick together. Who is going to help Gavin? Who is going to fix this horrific mess? You made this mess, Mom." Derek said, his voice terrifyingly calm and steady. "You enabled her every single step of the way. You handed her the keys to my house. You defended her when she assaulted my pregnant wife. You stood right there by the window and cheered while she humiliated Natalie in front of hundreds of strangers tonight. You chose your side a long time ago." He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, crisp, white envelope. He pressed it flat against her chest, forcing her manicured hands to take it. "What is this?" she asked, looking down at the heavy paper, as if it were a live explosive. "That is a legally binding no-contact order." Derek explained, his words dropping like heavy anvils in the quiet, echoing ballroom. "I had my attorney drafted up 3 days ago. It has already been filed with the county clerk and signed by a judge. It explicitly forbids you, Gavin and Jasmine, from coming within 500 feet of my home, my workplace, or my wife." Brenda's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. She looked from the pristine white envelope to Derek's hardened face, desperately searching for any sign of hesitation or a cruel joke. There was none. He was completely serious. "If you call my phone, I will report it as harassment." Derek continued, laying out the boundaries with surgical, uncompromising precision. "If you show up at my house, I will have you arrested for trespassing. When my son is born, you will not get a phone call. You will not get a photograph. You will never meet him. As of tonight, you have absolutely zero access to my life. You cannot do this to me legally." Brenda shrieked, clutching the envelope tightly against her chest. She looked wildly around the empty room, as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows and stop him. When she realized they were entirely alone with Gavin's muffled sobbing, her anger pivoted sharply. She glared at me, her eyes burning with pure venom. "This is your doing, Natalie," Brenda hissed, her voice dripping with raw hatred. "You poisoned him against his own mother. You dragged my family's name through the mud because you could never fit in with our lifestyle. You are a cold, calculating monster." I stepped forward, moving out from behind Derek's protective shadow. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "I am an auditor, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level and absolutely devoid of pity. "I simply read the numbers and present the facts. The monster in your family was the woman you just watched get hauled out of here in handcuffs, and the real tragedy is that you loved her for it." Brenda flinched violently as if I had physically struck her across the face. "You worshipped Jasmine because she gave you the shiny, wealthy illusion you so desperately craved." I continued, stepping closer so she could not escape my unwavering gaze. "You let her steal your oldest son's livelihood. You let her try to destroy your youngest son's marriage. You sacrificed your own flesh and blood on the altar of a cosmetic brand funded entirely by federal tax fraud." I looked down at Gavin, who was still paralyzed on the floor, and then back up to the mother who had helped ruin him. "You wanted the perfect, glamorous daughter-in-law," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, devastating finality. "Well, you got her. I hope her federal prison uniform comes in your favorite color. Goodbye, Brenda." I turned my back on her without waiting for a response. I linked my arms securely through Derek's, and together we walked toward the heavy oak doors. We did not look back at the shattered remnants of his family. We stepped out of the penthouse, leaving them to their fate. 2 months later, the bitter cold of the Chicago winter was nothing but a distant memory. I stood by the open window of our new home in a quiet, sun-drenched neighborhood in Austin, Texas. A gentle, warm breeze rustled the sheer white curtains, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from the garden below. It was a deeply ironic flower to have growing outside my window, but it no longer carried any power to disturb my peace. I looked down at the tiny, perfect bundle resting safely in my arms. Our son Leo was born healthy, quiet, and completely surrounded by love. There were no hospital waiting room dramas. There were no passive-aggressive comments about my parenting or my appearance. There was just Derek, me, and the beautiful, peaceful family we had fought so incredibly hard to protect. Moving across the country was the final necessary step in liquidating the toxic assets from our lives. The legally binding no-contact order had held up perfectly. Brenda had tried to violate it exactly once, attempting to send a massive, gaudy floral arrangement to Derek's new corporate office with a manipulative, weeping note begging for immediate forgiveness. Derek simply handed the delivery directly to building security and forwarded the clear violation to our attorney. We never heard from her again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was currently living in a small, rented suburban apartment, entirely isolated and deeply bitter, that her elite country club friends had completely abandoned her after the massive public scandal broke. Gavin had been forced to rapidly liquidate his once thriving dental practice and file for total bankruptcy. He moved to a different state to start over, working long hours at a low-level corporate dental chain, carrying the massive, crushing burden of the federal IRS fines that Jasmine had left in her wake. He chose his path, and now he was walking it alone. I rocked Leo gently as Derek walked into the peaceful nursery, carrying 2 mugs of fresh, dark roast coffee and his digital tablet. He had a soft, relaxed smile on his face, a stark and wonderful contrast to the heavy, anxious tension he had carried for the last 4 years of our marriage. He handed me a warm mug, gently kissed the top of Leo's soft head, and held out the glowing screen. "You are going to want to see this," he said softly. I glanced at the tablet. It was a featured article from a major national news outlet. The headline was bold and absolute. "Former lifestyle influencer pleads guilty in massive federal embezzlement and wire fraud case." I read the detailed paragraphs while sipping my coffee. Facing a mountain of undeniable digital evidence and a meticulously documented corporate audit trail, Jasmine's high-priced defense attorney had strongly advised her to take a plea deal. There would be no glamorous, highly publicized trial for her to play the tragic victim. She had officially pled guilty to 3 counts of federal wire fraud and tax evasion. The federal judge had sentenced her to 5 years in a maximum security penitentiary, followed by a decade of supervised release and absolute financial restitution. Her assets had been entirely seized by the government. The luxury downtown apartment, the custom menswear, the designer luggage I had thrown on my lawn, it was all gone. Her 500,000 followers had vanished overnight, replaced by internet sleuths who quickly turned her spectacular downfall into a viral cautionary tale about the severe dangers of extreme narcissism and financial greed. I handed the tablet back to Derek, feeling a profound, absolute sense of catharsis wash over my entire body. I did not feel the need to gloat. I did not feel the need to post a triumphant response online. The corporate audit was closed. The accounts were permanently settled. Derek wrapped his free arms securely around my waist, pulling me and our newborn son close to his chest. We stood there in the quiet, golden sunlight of our new home, completely free. Looking back on that chaotic night at the steakhouse, I realized the ultimate revenge was not the massive public takedown or the federal arrest. The true victory was taking back my own power, refusing to be a silent, compliant victim, and building a life so beautiful and secure that their toxicity could never reach us again. Jasmine spent years trying to make me feel invisible and worthless. But in the end, I discovered that living authentically and protecting your peace is the brightest light you can possibly shine. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your sanity and your future? I would love to hear how you claimed your personal freedom in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience, strong boundaries, and absolute justice. Thank you for listening, and remember that you always have the power to audit your own life and remove what no longer serves you. The most profound lesson to be drawn from Natalie's journey is that the concept of keeping the peace in a toxic family dynamic is a dangerous and destructive myth. For years, Natalie and her husband Derek chose the path of least resistance. They tolerated Jasmine's inappropriate boundary crossing and Brenda's blatant favoritism, mistakenly believing that their polite silence would preserve family harmony and prevent conflict. However, this story powerfully illustrates that when you shrink yourself to accommodate someone else's toxic behavior, you are not creating peace. You are merely funding their dysfunction at the expense of your own mental health and safety. Toxic individuals thrive in the shadows of compliance and avoidance. They rely on the societal expectation of family loyalty to manipulate, gaslight, and exploit their relatives without consequence. Natalie's pivotal transformation occurs the moment she stops playing the role of the compliant victim and adopts the mindset of an auditor. She realizes that true peace cannot exist in an environment built on financial lies, pathological obsession, and emotional abuse. By meticulously gathering the facts and exposing the undeniable truth, she demonstrates that you do not owe blind loyalty to people who actively seek to harm you, regardless of their title in the family tree. Ultimately, the narrative teaches us that authentic freedom requires the courage to let a rotten foundation completely collapse. Walking away from a deeply toxic family is not an act of cruelty, but an essential act of self-preservation. It is only by enforcing impenetrable boundaries and refusing to participate in another person's delusion that you can build a genuinely happy, secure life. If you are currently sacrificing your own well-being to maintain a false sense of family harmony, take a stand today to audit your relationships, cut ties with toxicity, and enforce the firm boundaries you deserve.